Did you ever wonder why hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, once promising treatments for COVID-19, were hastily discredited? The early days of the pandemic saw a glimmer of hope in these two drugs, both well-known and widely used for other ailments. Initial studies showed promise, yet, in a whirlwind of controversy and confusion, they were quickly dismissed. Take the Lancet study, for instance. Published in 2020, it claimed that hydroxychloroquine increased mortality rates among COVID-19 patients. Yet the ink had barely dried when over 100 scientists raised red flags about the data's integrity. The result? The Lancet had to retract the study due to data fabrication, but the damage was already done. The early promise of hydroxychloroquine was overshadowed by this controversy. But it wasn't just hydroxychloroquine. Ivermectin, too, faced a similar fate. Dr. Tess Lawrie, a diligent researcher who authored multiple meta-analyses on ivermectin, reported systematic suppression of her findings. She painted a picture of a concerted effort by pharmaceutical interests to delegitimize ivermectin due to its low cost and lack of patent profitability. In other words, it wasn't a money spinner, and thus, according to Dr. Lawrie, it was intentionally sidelined. This early dismissal of hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin raises questions about the integrity of our health agencies and the media. Were they too quick to judge? Did they succumb to external pressures? Or did they genuinely believe these treatments were ineffective? The truth is, we may never know. But what we do know is that these once promising treatments were swiftly discredited and discarded. And in the midst of a global pandemic, where every possible solution should have been explored and exhausted, this seems like a hasty decision. So the question arises, were these drugs dismissed too soon? How did vaccines become the only acceptable solution to the COVID-19 pandemic? In the midst of the pandemic, the FDA established certain criteria for emergency use authorization, or EUA, for potential treatments. One of these requirements was that there could be no adequate, approved, and available alternatives. This stipulation, while seemingly pragmatic on the surface, may have inadvertently created an environment where alternative treatments were not just overlooked, but actively suppressed. This isn't just a theory, but a concern raised by critics who argue that this rule may have incentivized the rush to dismiss other treatments in favor of vaccines. After all, expedited vaccine development and rollout became a global priority, but at what cost? Let's turn our attention to Pfizer, one of the leading vaccine manufacturers. Leaked emails from within the company revealed discussions among executives about downplaying alternative treatments. The intent? To maintain public focus on vaccines. It's important to note that this isn't to demonize Pfizer or any other pharmaceutical company, but rather to highlight potential biases that could have influenced public health discourse and policy. The question we must ask ourselves is, did the push for vaccines, fueled by the urgency of the pandemic and the FDA's EUA requirements, compromise a more measured, multifaceted approach to treatment? Could there have been a more balanced, inclusive conversation about treatment options, one that didn't automatically discredit alternatives to vaccines? We can't rewrite history, but we can learn from it. We can examine the decisions that were made, the potential biases that may have influenced those decisions, and the consequences that followed. Could a rush for a vaccine have clouded the judgment of those in power? As we continue to navigate this pandemic and prepare for future ones, these are the questions we must grapple with. It's not about pointing fingers, but about fostering transparency, accountability, and ultimately prioritizing the health and well-being of all. And why did doctors advocating for alternative treatments face such fierce opposition? This question has been the elephant in the room throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's not just an idle query. It's the cry of doctors on the front lines, advocating for alternatives, only to be met with resistance, vilification, and even professional repercussions. A prime example is America's frontline doctors, a group who dared to publicly support early treatment protocols, including hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. These physicians weren't promoting reckless behavior or peddling snake oil. They were simply advocating for consideration of all available treatments. Yet, they reported targeted harassment, with key figures like Dr. Simone Gold being fired from their positions and even facing legal action on unrelated charges. But the silencing didn't stop at job loss or legal threats. In the digital age, information control extends to the virtual public square, social media. Platforms like YouTube and Twitter became battlegrounds, where videos discussing alternative treatments were removed often labeled as misinformation. But who decides what is misinformation? Who is the gatekeeper of truth? Leaked documents from Twitter, aptly named the Twitter Files, revealed a chilling detail. There was coordination with government agencies to suppress content discussing alternative treatments. This isn't just about controlling a narrative, it's about controlling what you as a citizen are allowed to know, to question, to discuss. Now, don't get me wrong, misinformation can be dangerous, especially during a public health crisis. But who's to say that alternative viewpoints, supported by credentialed frontline doctors, are misinformation? Shouldn't all voices be heard, all evidence examined in the pursuit of truth and the best possible treatments? Was this an effort to control the narrative, or a necessary measure to prevent the spread of misinformation? The answer isn't black and white, but it's a question we must continue to ask. Because in the end, it's not just about a virus or a vaccine. It's about the freedom to question, to seek answers, and ultimately, the right to make informed decisions about our own health. What role did pharmaceutical companies play in shaping the COVID-19 treatment narrative? As we delve deeper, we find a revolving door between pharmaceutical companies and regulatory bodies. The year 2021 saw a revealing investigation by The Intercept, which uncovered an alarming number of former FDA officials who found new homes within pharmaceutical companies after their tenure. One standout instance is Dr. Scott Gottlieb, former FDA commissioner, who joined Pfizer's board. This raises eyebrows and begs the question, how impartial can these companies be when they're staffed by those who once held the reins of regulation? But the influence doesn't stop at personnel swaps. The coffers of pharmaceutical giants like Pfizer and Moderna didn't just fund their vaccine research. Leaked documents show substantial funding flowing into research institutions and media outlets. This raises another concern. Can we trust the objectivity of research and reporting when it's sponsored by those who stand to profit from a particular outcome? In the grand chessboard of the COVID-19 pandemic, these pharmaceutical companies were not just players. They were the ones moving the pieces, shaping narratives, and influencing policies. Their significant financial and institutional influence played a pivotal role in sidelining alternative treatments and pushing vaccines to the forefront. This isn't an outright condemnation of pharmaceutical companies. After all, their work led to the development of vaccines that have undeniably saved countless lives. But it's crucial to recognize the potential for conflict of interest and manipulation in a system where those who profit from a crisis also wield significant power over its resolution. The question isn't necessarily about the efficacy of the vaccines or the lack thereof in alternative treatments. It's about the transparency, integrity, and independence of the processes that lead us to these conclusions. Can we trust a system that allows the very companies profiting from a crisis to influence its solution? As we venture further into this new age of global health crises, this is a question we must continue to ask. As we've seen, the story of COVID-19 treatments is not as straightforward as it may seem. We journeyed through the pandemic's early days, where promising studies like hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin were discredited amid controversies and retractions. We delved into emergency use authorization, revealing incentives that may have prioritized vaccines over alternative treatments. Leaked communications from Pfizer have cast doubts on the integrity of the process, suggesting orchestration to maintain focus on vaccines. We shed light on the trials of doctors advocating for alternative treatments. Their voices were silenced and careers risked to uphold a singular narrative around COVID-19 treatments. Social media censorship played a part, swiftly removing content challenging the status quo. We examined the influence of pharmaceutical companies, shaping the narrative and policies surrounding COVID-19 treatments. From FDA officials transitioning into roles within these companies, to funding of research institutions and media outlets, blurred lines between regulator and regulated raise concerns about potential conflicts of interest. We've sought not to discredit the efforts of scientists and healthcare workers in combating the pandemic, but to shed light on complexities and biases shaping our understanding of COVID-19 treatments. Healthy skepticism and open dialogue are pillars of scientific exploration. If you're keen on the unconventional, eager to challenge norms and ready to explore the familiar with a fresh perspective, remember, this is just the beginning. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time.